Amara Bennett's champagne flute stopped midair when Dante Moretti pointed at her beneath the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. The string quartet kept playing near the marble staircase, bows whispering across polished wood, while warm amber light spilled over black tuxedos and jeweled gowns inside Manhattan's Halston Grand. Amara stood 6 feet from Dante's table with a leather event folder pressed against her ribs, the embossed corners digging into her palm. She had been moving through the gala for 3 hours without a mistake, checking donor arrivals, redirecting security, placing handwritten notes beside Dante's dinner plate before anyone realized he needed them. Then Victor Langford, chairman of one of the evening's largest foundations, glanced at the empty chair beside him. "Moretti, I thought Senator Caldwell was joining us." Dante's jaw tightened. A server passed carrying silver trays of champagne, and the faint citrus scent of expensive cologne mixed with roasted beef drifting from the dining room. Amara stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell's office moved his arrival to 9:30. I sent the update at 6:15. Dante looked at her, not at his phone, not at the folder where she had printed the confirmation. At her. "You're telling me this now?" His voice was quiet enough to force the nearby conversations to die around it. Amara's fingers slid to the correct page. "Sir, I told you before we left the office. The revised schedule is also enough." The word landed harder than a shout. A champagne cork popped somewhere near the bar, followed by nervous laughter that vanished almost instantly. Dante rose from his chair, straightening the cuff of his charcoal jacket. The black silk looked almost blue beneath the chandelier light. "Do you know what tonight cost me?" Amara held the folder open. The paper trembled once against her thumb, then stopped. Yes. Apparently not. Several guests had turned toward them now. Amara could feel their attention without looking. Diamonds catching light. Glasses paused near painted lips. Men leaning subtly away from their conversations. Dante took one step closer. "Your job is to make sure I don't have to remember these details." She drew a breath through her nose. The ballroom air felt colder near the marble floor. "I did remind you." A muscle moved along Dante's cheek. For 4 years, Amara had known that movement. It came before he ended negotiations, dismissed advisors, or made entire rooms reconsider which side they were standing on. Tonight, it was aimed at her. "You're my secretary, Amara." His eyes dropped briefly to the folder in her hands. "Try acting like one." Someone behind Victor gave a short, surprised laugh before burying it inside a cough. Another guest looked down into his drink. Amara did not answer. She closed the folder carefully, aligning its edges with both hands. Then she reached behind her neck and unclipped the slim black credential identifying her as Dante Moretti's executive secretary. The plastic badge was warm from her skin. She placed it on the white linen tablecloth beside his untouched wine glass. Dante's gaze fell to it. For the first time that evening, he said nothing. Amara turned away from him and crossed the ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble as conversations slowly began again behind her. She reached the far end of the room just as the quartet shifted into a slower song. She thought no one had followed. Then a man in a midnight blue tuxedo stepped away from the crowd, watched her for several seconds, and began walking directly toward her. The man in the midnight blue tuxedo stopped halfway across the ballroom when Amara quietly lifted one hand, asking for distance without saying a word. He understood. With a slight nod, he turned toward the bar instead, leaving the space between them untouched. Amara exhaled and slipped through a velvet curtained service entrance where the music softened into a distant pulse. Stainless steel carts rolled across tile. Porcelain plates clicked beneath fluorescent lights, and the warm smell of butter and rosemary hung over the catering corridor. She pressed both palms against the cool edge of a service table until the marks from the leather folder faded from her fingers. For years, that was how long Dante Moretti had grown accustomed to seeing her 3 steps behind him. For years earlier, Amara had entered Moretti Holdings carrying a drugstore portfolio, and wearing a navy suit, she had altered herself at the kitchen table. Dante had interviewed her for 11 minutes. His office smelled of cedar and espresso, with Manhattan spread beyond the glass like something he owned. "You'll manage my calendar, correspondence, travel, and meetings," he had said without offering a smile. "I don't repeat instructions." "Neither do I," Amara had answered. His eyes had lifted from her resume then. That had been the beginning. Within months, She stopped being merely the woman who answered his phone. She learned which investors required 10 minutes of small talk before business, which private dining rooms had secure entrances, which drivers Dante trusted, which meetings could move, and which could cost millions if they did. Once, when Dante was boarding a flight to Chicago, Amara caught a 12-minute scheduling discrepancy between his itinerary and the security manifest. She stepped onto the tarmac in 30-degree wind, heels striking concrete, and physically blocked the open SUV door until his security chief checked the paperwork. Dante had stared at her through the cold exhaust curling between them. "You're delaying me." "Yes. You have 60 seconds to give me a reason." She handed him the corrected manifest. His irritation disappeared before the page reached his second hand. The trip changed. The meeting happened safely at another location. Dante never thanked her. The next morning, however, a black company card appeared on her desk with unrestricted authorization for executive logistics. That was how Dante communicated trust. Access instead of words, responsibility instead of praise. Amara accepted both because she believed competence eventually became impossible to ignore. Back at the Halston Grand, the kitchen doors swung open and released another swell of violin music into the corridor. Amara looked down at the gala schedule still tucked beneath her arm. Senator Caldwell's revised arrival time was highlighted in yellow. Beneath it sat Dante's handwritten initials, placed there when she had shown him the change at 6:17 p.m. Her thumb rested over the ink. He had known. Inside the ballroom, Dante stood exactly where she had left him. Her credential remained beside his wine glass, a small rectangle of black plastic against white linen. Victor Langford was speaking, but Dante's attention kept shifting toward the doors through which Amara had disappeared. A waiter approached him with a question about the senator's revised seating. Dante answered automatically, then stopped. "Ask Amara." The waiter glanced toward the empty doorway. "Mr. Moretti," I believe she stepped away. Dante looked at the badge again. Across the room, the man in the midnight blue tuxedo had also noticed the empty doorway. He set down his untouched bourbon. Amara returned before either man could move. The ballroom's golden light caught the edge of her earrings as she crossed directly toward Dante, the leather folder held at her side now rather than against her chest. She stopped at his table, opened it to the revised schedule, and placed the page beside her credential. Dante saw his initials immediately. Amara did not accuse him. She did not raise her voice. "I'll finish tonight because I gave my word that this event would run properly." She slid the black badge toward him with one finger. "Tomorrow morning, you'll have my resignation." Then she turned away, leaving Dante staring at his own handwriting while, across the ballroom, the man in midnight blue rose from his chair. Amara had barely crossed the ballroom when a woman in silver stepped directly into her path. Celeste Whitmore wore diamonds at her throat and carried a champagne coupe between two manicured fingers, the glass catching fractured gold from the chandeliers overhead. Behind her, the quartet moved into a brighter passage, violin notes skating over the low murmur of 200 guests. "There you are," Celeste said, looking Amara slowly from her black heels to the simple midnight dress she had chosen because Dante's office had instructed staff to remain formal but unobtrusive. "I was wondering who handled Mr. Moretti's little disasters." Amara shifted the leather folder to her other hand. "Excuse me, Ms. Whitmore. I need to confirm the senator's table." Celeste moved with her, blocking the aisle again. Her perfume was sharp and floral, almost metallic beneath the warm scent of candle wax and wine. "Relax. I'm complimenting you." Two women beside her smiled into their glasses. Celeste touched the sleeve of Amara's dress with one fingertip. "Though I have to admit, I couldn't tell whether you were his secretary or part of the staff entertainment tonight." One of the women laughed. This time nobody disguised it as a cough. Amara's hand tightened around the folder until the leather creaked. 10 feet away, Dante heard every word. She knew because his head turned. Their eyes met across the candlelit tables. For one suspended second, Amara waited. Dante could silence the exchange with 3 words. Everyone in that ballroom knew it. Celeste knew it too. Her smile weakened as she glanced toward him. But Victor Langford had leaned close to Dante, speaking urgently about the senator and the donors waiting near the private lounge. Dante looked from Amara to Victor. Then he turned back to business. That movement lasted barely a second. It was enough. Amara lowered her eyes to Celeste's hand still resting on her sleeve. Please remove your hand. Celeste blinked. Excuse me. Amara lifted her gaze. You heard me. The laughter stopped. Celeste withdrew her fingers as though the fabric had suddenly become hot. Amara stepped around her, but instead of retreating toward the service corridor, she walked directly to the event coordinator beside the stage. She opened the folder, removed the seating chart, donor schedule, security contact sheet, and revised arrival list, then placed them neatly on the coordinator's podium. Senator Caldwell arrives at 9:30 through the east entrance. His security detail has already been cleared. Mr. Langford's remarks move forward 7 minutes. Dessert service waits until the senator is seated. The coordinator stared at the documents. Amara, where are you going? I'm making sure you don't need me to finish the evening. She handed over her headset. Across the ballroom, Dante finally broke away from Victor. His polished shoes struck the marble with measured force as he crossed toward her. Amara. She kept moving. Stop. She did, but she did not turn immediately. The air conditioning brushed cold against the back of her neck where her credential had hung earlier. When she faced him, Dante was only a few feet away. Behind him, Celeste watched from beside the dance floor. You said you would finish tonight, Dante said. And I am. Everything required to finish it is on that podium. That isn't what I meant. I know. Dante's voice dropped. Then don't walk away while I'm speaking to you. Amara looked past him toward the table where her badge still rested beside his wine glass. Then she looked directly into his eyes. For years ago, you hired my time, Mr. Moretti. You never bought my dignity. She stepped around him. Dante did not reach for her. He simply stood beneath the chandelier as Amara walked toward the edge of the dance floor, where the man in the midnight blue tuxedo was now waiting. This time, when he took one deliberate step toward her, Amara did not raise her hand to stop him. The man in midnight blue stopped 3 feet from Amara, but before he could speak, the event coordinator hurried between them with a phone pressed to her ear. Ms. Bennett, Senator Caldwell's advance team, is at the east entrance. They're asking for the revised protocol. Amara looked toward Dante. He had heard it too. The chandeliers threw hard points of light across his cuff links while the bass from the quartet vibrated faintly through the polished marble beneath their shoes. For 4 years, this was the moment when Amara would have moved automatically, phone in one hand, folder in the other, fixing the problem before Dante had to acknowledge it existed. Tonight, she stayed still. The protocol sheet is on the podium, she said. Security contact is highlighted in blue. The coordinator swallowed. They're asking for you specifically. Dante crossed the remaining distance. Handle it, Amara. She turned her head toward him. Champagne and candle wax scented the air between them, and somewhere behind the ballroom doors, silverware struck porcelain in a rapid metallic rhythm. No, Dante's expression barely moved. What did you say? I said no. Amara handed the coordinator the final page from her folder. Call Moretti Security. They have the same instructions I do. Then she walked away. The effect was immediate. A donor stopped Dante near the center table asking whether the senator's remarks would precede the auction. A waiter appeared with 2 seating cards bearing the same table number. Victor Langford wanted confirmation about a private introduction Dante had never entered into his own calendar because Amara always remembered it for him. Dante answered one question, then another. His phone vibrated twice. A third call arrived before he could unlock the screen. He looked instinctively toward Amara. She was 20 feet away beside a tall arrangement of white orchids, speaking quietly to the coordinator and pointing once toward the east doors. She gave the woman exactly enough information to prevent the gala from failing, then stepped back. No headset, no badge, no position at Dante's shoulder. The machine continued running, but now Dante could hear every gear Amara had once kept silent. Mr. Moretti. Victor held up his phone. Caldwell's people want the updated donor list. Dante's thumb hovered over his screen. It's in the event file. Which file? Dante said nothing. Across the room, Amara closed the leather folder for the last time. Then she carried it to Dante's table and set it beside her black credential. The folder made a soft, final sound against the linen. Everything through midnight is there, she said. Dante looked from the folder to her. You're still employed until tomorrow morning. Then consider this the most complete handoff you've ever received. His hand flattened against the table. You don't walk out because of one bad moment. Amara's gaze shifted toward Celeste Whitmore, who was pretending not to watch from beside the bar. Then back to him. It wasn't one moment. The quartet finished its song. Applause rolled through the ballroom, warm and scattered, before fading into the clink of glasses. Tonight was simply the first time you made me understand what all the other moments meant. Dante's fingers slowly lifted from the tablecloth. Amara reached into her small evening bag, removed her company phone, and placed it beside the credential. The screen glowed once with another incoming message before going dark. At 9 tomorrow morning, my resignation will be on your desk. At 9:05, this number stops being mine. She turned toward the dance floor. The man in midnight blue had remained where she could see him, waiting without interrupting, without ordering, without assuming she owed him her attention. Dante followed her gaze, and for the first time that night, he understood exactly where the stranger intended to walk next. The stranger crossed the last few feet just as the quartet's pianist struck the opening notes of a slow waltz. Amara recognized him now. Julian Cross, founder of Cross Meridian Capital, a man whose name appeared often enough in Dante's briefing folders that she knew exactly how much history stood between the two men. Not friendship, not quite hostility. Competition conducted through acquisitions, private tables, and handshakes where neither man ever looked away first. Julian stopped at a respectful distance. Warm chandelier light caught the silver at his temples, while the polished dance floor reflected his midnight blue tuxedo like dark water. Ms. Bennett. Amara's fingers tightened around her evening bag. Mr. Cross, you remember me. Remembering people is part of the job. Julian glanced toward the table where her credential and company phone lay beside Dante's wine glass. I'm beginning to think people have mistaken your job for your identity. Before Amara could answer, Dante arrived. His presence changed the small circle around them instantly. A nearby conversation softened. A waiter carrying champagne adjusted course. Even Julian's expression became still. Cross. Dante's voice was controlled. Moretti. Julian gave him a slight nod. No handshake followed. Amara stepped aside, refusing to become the space through which two powerful men measured each other. If you gentlemen have business, I'll leave you to it. Actually, Julian said, my business is with you. Dante's eyes shifted to him. The cello entered beneath the violin, low and warm, while couples began moving onto the floor. Julian turned fully toward Amara. I've watched you run this room all evening. Half these people think events like this happen because wealthy men write checks. He glanced toward the podium stacked with the documents she had prepared. They don't notice the person making sure every door opens at the right second. Dante's jaw hardened. Careful. Julian looked at him. With what? With turning something you don't understand into entertainment. Amara's head turned sharply. Don't. Dante looked at her. Amara, you don't get to humiliate me publicly and then decide who is allowed to speak to me privately. The words were quiet, but several guests close enough to hear suddenly found reasons to study their drinks. Julian said nothing. He simply waited. That restraint mattered more than another compliment could have. Dante lowered his voice. You're still representing my office tonight. Amara's gaze moved toward the black credential on the distant table. No, the paperwork is representing your office. I'm standing here as myself. Dante followed her eyes and saw what she meant. No badge, no headset, no company phone. Nothing visible tied her to him anymore. The orchestra settled fully into the waltz, and the first couples turned beneath the chandeliers. Julian adjusted one cuff, then looked at Amara, not Dante. Then perhaps I should ask the woman instead of the secretary. He extended his hand. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, his palm open between them. May I have this dance? The surrounding room seemed to narrow around that single question. Amara looked at Julian's hand, then at Dante. He had commanded meetings with senators, financiers, union leaders, and men who never made him repeat himself. Now he stood motionless beside a dance floor while another man offered Amara the one thing Dante had denied her all evening, a choice. Dante's lips parted. Amara. She did not answer him. She placed her evening bag on the edge of an empty table, turned back to Julian, and rested her hand lightly in his. Yes, Mr. Cross, she said. You may. Julian led her onto the floor as the violin rose above the room, and Dante Moretti was left standing alone beneath the chandeliers, while every person who had watched him diminish his secretary now watched another man treat her like the most important woman in the room. Amara felt the entire ballroom watching before Julian had guided her through the first turn. His hand rested lightly at the proper distance against her back, never pulling, never assuming, while her other hand remained in his. Beneath their feet, the polished marble reflected rings of amber chandelier light, and the quartet's slow melody floated through the room with the soft scrape of bows against strings. The air smelled of white roses, candle wax, and the bourbon someone had abandoned near the edge of the floor. "You can still change your mind," Julian said quietly. Amara looked at him. "About dancing? About letting 200 strangers decide what this dance means?" Her shoulders loosened by half an inch. "They've been deciding what I mean all night." Julian gave no clever answer. He simply turned with the music, allowing her to choose the distance between them. 20 feet away, Dante stood beside his table with one hand resting against the back of an empty chair. His untouched wine had warmed beneath the lights. Victor approached him with a question, but Dante raised 2 fingers without looking away from the floor. Victor stopped speaking. Amara noticed. For years, that gesture had belonged to her world. "Wait. Not now. Handle it." She had obeyed it hundreds of times. Tonight, Dante used it because he could not stop watching someone else treat her as though her presence required no command at all. "Do you remember the Halpern acquisition?" Julian asked. Amara's eyes returned to him. 3 years ago, you corrected the valuation packet 40 minutes before signatures. There was a duplicated liability. A $12 million duplicated liability. Julian guided her through another turn. "My finance director missed it. Moretti's attorneys missed it. I missed it." Amara shook her head slightly. "I was checking Dante's briefing materials. It was my job." "That sentence," Julian said, "is how people have gotten away with undervaluing you." They passed close to Dante's side of the floor. His gaze met Amara's for a heartbeat before the dance carried her away again. Julian continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You prevented both companies from signing a document built on bad numbers. I asked Moretti afterward who caught it." Amara's step faltered once. Julian steadied the rhythm without tightening his grip. "What did he say?" "He said his office handled it." Across the floor, Dante's fingers closed around the chair. The leather creaked beneath his palm. Amara said nothing for several measures. The violin climbed higher, clean and bright beneath the chandeliers. Then Julian stopped near the center of the floor as the music approached its final phrase. Several nearby couples slowed with them. "For what it's worth," he said, no longer lowering his voice, "I've negotiated with senators, CEOs, and men who believe expensive suits make them intelligent." A few guests turned. Julian looked directly at Amara. "You may be the smartest person in this room." Silence spread outward before the final violin note had even faded. Amara's eyes moved across the faces that had laughed earlier. Celeste Whitmore lowered her champagne glass. Victor looked toward Dante. Dante remained still. Julian released Amara's hand when the music ended and stepped back, leaving the next choice entirely hers. That was when Dante finally moved. He crossed onto the dance floor, the sound of his shoes distinct in the silence, and stopped directly in front of Julian. "You've made your point." Julian's expression remained calm. "No, Dante." He glanced once at Amara, then back at him. "She just made yours impossible to defend." Dante's hand left the chair and fell to his side as the ballroom waited for him to answer. The quartet had stopped completely now. Only the low hum of the ventilation system and the delicate clink of ice against crystal came from the surrounding tables. Julian stood beneath the amber chandelier light without moving closer, while Amara remained between the 2 men but belonged to neither side. "This conversation is over," Dante said. Julian's mouth barely moved. "That's usually something you get to decide, isn't it?" Dante took one measured step forward. Amara stepped between them before another could follow. Her heel struck the marble with a clean, sharp click. "Enough." Both men looked at her. "I will not become another argument between 2 powerful men." She turned first to Julian. "Thank you for the dance." Then to Dante. "And I meant what I said. 9 tomorrow morning." She retrieved her evening bag and walked toward the ballroom doors. This time Dante did not order her to stop. Julian watched her leave, then reached inside his jacket and removed a cream-colored business card. He placed it beside Amara's abandoned credential on Dante's table. "My office has been trying to recruit a chief of staff for 6 months, he said. Dante looked down at the card. "Don't. You still think I'm doing this to provoke you?" Julian straightened his cuff. That may be the most expensive mistake you make tonight. Then he walked away. Dante remained beside the table as the quartet cautiously began another song. His gaze settled on the objects arranged against the white linen. Amara's credential, her company phone, the leather folder, Julian's card. 4 years of access reduced to things she had been able to put down in less than 5 minutes. Mr. Moretti? The event coordinator approached carrying the folder. Senator Caldwell is seated. Everything is running according to Ms. Bennett's handoff. Dante opened the folder. Every page was tabbed. Every change was time-stamped. Beside Caldwell's revised arrival, Amara had written, confirmed with DM, 6:17 p.m. Dante's own initials sat beneath it. He stared at the ink, then turned pages faster. Langford introduction moved, Amara. Donor conflict resolved, Amara. Security entrance reassigned, Amara. Auction schedule corrected, Amara. None of it was hidden. He had simply stopped seeing the name because he had grown accustomed to the result. How much of tonight did she handle? Dante asked. The coordinator hesitated. All of it, essentially. The paper stopped moving beneath his fingers. And the Caldwell problem? There wasn't one until the schedule was changed back. Dante lifted his eyes. By whom? She pointed to a notation in the margin. Executive instruction, 7:02 p.m. Dante remembered it immediately. Victor had suggested keeping the original sequence for the donors, and Dante had approved it without checking Amara's revised schedule. The mistake he had placed at her feet beneath 200 watching faces had carried his own signature. He closed the folder. Across the ballroom, Julian was speaking to an assistant near the bar. Dante watched him remove another card, write something on its back, and hand it over. What is he doing? Dante asked. The coordinator followed his gaze. I heard Mr. Cross ask his office to prepare an offer for Ms. Bennett. Dante's eyes sharpened. For what position? Chief of Staff. The coordinator lowered her voice. Executive authority. Direct reporting line. I believe he wants the written offer delivered before she leaves tonight. Dante looked toward the ballroom doors Amara had passed through minutes earlier. Then at her badge. Then at Julian. For years, Dante had assumed the most dangerous thing Amara could do was leave him. Now another possibility stood across the room in a midnight blue tuxedo. She could leave and immediately be valued somewhere else. Dante picked up her credential, closed his fist around it, and walked toward the stage. At the microphone, he stopped the quartet with one raised hand. Conversations died one by one. Julian turned. Near the ballroom entrance, Amara heard the sudden silence and looked back. Dante stared across the room at the woman he had humiliated, then pulled the microphone toward him. Before anyone leaves, he said, there is something I need to correct. Dante's voice carried through the ballroom without force, and somehow that made every word land harder. The mistake involving Senator Caldwell was mine. No glass moved. No chair scraped. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, 200 guests stood or sat in a silence broken only by the faint electric hum of the microphone. Amara remained near the ballroom entrance, one hand resting against the brass door handle, its metal cool beneath her fingers. Dante opened the leather folder on the podium. Paper whispered against paper. At 6:17 tonight, Amara Bennett gave me the corrected schedule. At 7:02, I approved a change that ignored it. He lifted the page displaying his initials. Then, when the consequences became visible, I blamed her. Celeste Whitmore's champagne coupe slowly lowered toward the table. Victor Langford stared at the white linen in front of him. Julian stood near the bar beneath softer amber light, saying nothing. Dante looked toward Amara. And I did it publicly. Her hand left the door. She did not move closer. So I'll correct it publicly. Dante removed Amara's black credential from his pocket and placed it beside the microphone. The plastic clicked against polished wood. For 4 years, this woman has managed meetings I forgot, corrected decisions I made too quickly, protected negotiations before I understood they were in danger, and kept my office functioning with a level of discipline I treated as if it appeared by itself. His fingers remained beside the badge. Tonight, I called her my secretary as though the title made her smaller. Several faces turned toward Amara. This time she did not lower her eyes. Dante continued. It doesn't. He glanced toward Celeste. And when someone in this room insulted her afterward, I heard it. Celeste's shoulders stiffened. I chose not to interrupt because I considered another conversation more important. Dante paused. The microphone caught the quiet breath he took. There wasn't one. Amara's jaw shifted once. That was all. Dante stepped away from the podium. No threat followed. No demand for applause. He walked down from the stage and crossed the marble until he stood several feet from her. The scent of white roses hung between them, and behind him the candles flickered in hundreds of glass holders. Your resignation is yours to give, he said. I won't refuse it. I won't raise your salary to make tonight disappear. And I won't ask you to pretend an apology repairs what happened. Amara studied him. Then what are you asking? Nothing. Dante held out her credential, not toward her neck, but flat across his open palm. I'm returning something I had no right to use against you. She looked at the badge but did not take it. A quiet movement came from behind Dante. Julian approached carrying a cream envelope. He stopped beside them and offered it to Amara. My office finished the paperwork. Dante's gaze dropped to the envelope. Julian continued, Chief of Staff. Full executive authority. Direct reporting line to me. The compensation is inside. Amara accepted it. The paper was thick and textured beneath her fingertips. Dante's open hand slowly lowered, her credentials still resting in his palm. For the first time all evening, nobody waited for his decision. They waited for hers. Amara looked at the badge representing 4 years behind Dante, then at the envelope offering a place where someone had already asked her to stand beside power instead of beneath it. She closed her fingers around Julian's offer. Tomorrow at 9, she said to Dante, you'll still receive my resignation. Dante gave one slow nod. Amara turned toward Julian. And tomorrow at 9:05, Mr. Cross, I'll call you. Julian stepped aside and opened the ballroom door for her. Cool air from the marble corridor swept across the hem of her dress. Amara walked through without looking back, carrying the offer in her hand, while Dante remained beneath the chandeliers holding the badge she had chosen to leave behind. At 9 the next morning, Amara's resignation arrived on Dante's desk exactly as promised. The envelope was cream, the paper heavy beneath his fingers, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows Manhattan flashed silver beneath the morning sun. His office smelled of fresh espresso and cedar, but the chair beyond his desk remained empty. No quiet footsteps. No leather folder appearing at precisely the right moment. Dante read the letter once, signed the acknowledgement, and did something the man he had been 24 hours earlier would never have done. He let her leave without bargaining. At 9:05, Amara called Julian Cross. 6 months later, she entered another Manhattan ballroom beneath another ceiling of crystal chandeliers, but nothing about her place in the room was the same. A brass plaque beside the entrance listed the evening's principal hosts, and beneath Julian Cross's name appeared hers. Amara Bennett, Chief of Staff, Cross Meridian Capital. She wore a deep blue evening gown, simple and precise, and carried no folder against her chest. People came to her now. Executives waited while she finished conversations. A senator shook her hand and addressed her by name. The air carried the scent of gardenias and polished wood, while a jazz ensemble sent warm piano chords across the floor. Julian approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water and offered her one. You realize half the room wants 5 minutes on your calendar. Amara accepted the glass. Then half the room should have scheduled earlier. Julian laughed and moved away to greet a donor. He had never treated the dance 6 months earlier as a claim on her. He had offered a hand, then later an opportunity, and allowed her to decide what each meant. That was why Amara had accepted the job. Across the ballroom, a conversation shifted, opening a narrow line of sight toward the entrance. Dante Moretti had arrived. His charcoal tuxedo was immaculate, his posture unchanged, yet when several men approached him at once, he excused himself instead of allowing the room to rearrange around him. His eyes found Amara. She did not look away. Dante crossed the floor alone. He stopped several feet from her, exactly where Julian had stopped that night. Ms. Bennett. Mr. Moretti. His gaze briefly touched the brass host card beside her table. Chief of Staff suits you. It does. No apology followed. He had already given the one that mattered, in the same room where he had caused the harm. Instead, Dante reached inside his jacket and removed something small. Amara recognized the black credential immediately. Her old Moretti Holdings badge. He placed it on the table between them. I kept this because I thought it represented what I lost. Amara looked at him. Dante slid the badge toward her. I was wrong. It represents the position I mistook for the person. She picked it up, turned the plastic once between her fingers, then placed it back in his palm. Then you don't need it anymore. Dante closed his fingers around it and nodded. Behind them, the jazz ensemble softened into a slow standard. Couples began moving toward the dance floor. 6 months earlier, Dante would have assumed proximity gave him permission. This time he waited. Then he extended his hand, palm open, leaving several inches of empty air between them. May I have this dance? Amara looked at his hand, then into the face of the man who had once commanded her to stop walking away. No command came now. No audience mattered. No job depended on her answer. She let the silence remain long enough for Dante to understand that. Then Amara placed her hand in his. One dance. Dante gave the smallest smile. One dance. They stepped onto the floor beneath the chandeliers, not as boss and secretary, not as a powerful man granting attention to someone beneath him, but as two people standing on equal ground, because one had finally learned how to ask, and the other had always known she had the right to choose. And that night, Dante Moretti learned the one thing power had never taught him. Dignity begins where entitlement ends.